Welcome to Media Mac. Dr. Shermack here. So happy to have you tuning in and joining us here in week 12. We're in week 12 over at Cuesta, cruising along through the semester. If I sound a little different today, that's because I'm doing different things. I am traveling. I'm actually down in Los Angeles. It's a big weekend in our household. It is Cubs-Dodgers weekend. I am a diehard Cubs fan. I've been for my whole life. And my girlfriend is a diehard Dodgers fan. So yes, tomfoolery ensues. It sounds like a sitcom or something. So we are down in LA to catch all three games. Super excited about that, but I don't have my regular equipment. So I'm making do with what I have. So hopefully this will be pleasurable to your ear, and you will stick around and stay with us. So this week is really exciting for me because it's something that didn't used to happen in this class. We are talking about video games. I first started teaching this class at Moraine Valley Community College back near Chicago in 2009. And I didn't include video games in the curriculum at the time. And that was a mistake. And after a few years, I brought it back. I brought it into the curriculum. And now, 17 years later, here we are, and I don't even know if 1 week is enough, which is the way I feel about a lot of these topics that we cover. Video games, especially based on what's happening in the industry right now, which we'll get into today, is maybe one of the most important mass communication stories in this country, in this world. And a lot of people outside of gaming aren't really paying attention to it. So I'm going to talk about that today. That's our work for today. We're going to talk about why games count as mass media here in just a moment, the scale of this industry, which is massive. And then we're going to talk about the crisis that the industry is in right now. And I don't say that hyperbolically. It really is in a crisis. And a lot of the industries we've talked about in this class are in crises. I try to be hopeful about them, but I also try to be honest, and we're going to do that today. So let's get into it. And maybe some of you, I think this is less common than it used to be, but some of you may have looked at our syllabus at the beginning and said, oh, video games, that's different. Where I think some students used to be like, why the heck are we talking about video games? It's a fair question. The question is addressed in the beginning of our chapter this week, chapter 3. Games check every single box that we have used this entire semester to define mass media. All right, you have these huge centralized organizations, you have massive audiences dispersed all over the world. There are messages in these games about culture, about gender, violence, politics. It's driven by advertising like our other media. And it's also shaped by pressures from government, pressures from corporations, much like we've seen with television and news and film. And I think maybe the most fascinating thing, and sometimes the most surprising things for folks, is that this industry, this video game industry, if we're measuring things in dollars, is way bigger than most of the media industries we've been discussing. In fact, video games are bigger in dollar terms than film and recorded music combined. So it's not just a little bit bigger, it is immensely bigger. I got into video games as a pretty young kid. I was about 10 years old when we first got our first system in the house. And it was an NES, the old school NES with Super Mario. And I don't know, I just remember playing games like Contra and whatnot. But we were thrilled to get it. It was just, I want to say game changer, but that'd be a terrible pun. But it was totally this new toy that we could play. I have a twin brother, and so it was cool to have two remotes and be able to play each other. My brother Tim is a video game whiz. He'd pick it up and just know how to win the game right away. And I sucked. I wasn't very good, but I like to watch him play a lot. And I played with him, but he would kick my butt. But we had an NES, and then eventually we had a Genesis. a Sega Genesis, which was cool. Of course, Sonic, y'all know that. And then we moved on, and as I went into college, we got into the PlayStation series, and even in our household today, we live in a kid-free household, but we still have both a PlayStation 5 and a Nintendo Switch 2. So we still enjoy video games to this day, and I think there's a heck of a lot of entertainment value inherent in them. When I was prepping for today's show, I was reading an article in Science Direct, an academic journal. I'm sorry, on Science, not in Science Direct, on Science Direct. The journal is actually the Journal of Innovation and Knowledge. And these authors, and I'll link this in our Going Deep page for those of you in the class, the authors looked at 15 years of scholarship on the video game industry and just talked about what a dominant force video games are in entertainment and media, the economic and social implications, and the conclusion they also came to is that academia has been very slow to take it seriously. We saw this sort of thing in the 70s and 80s when newspapers didn't take sports journalism seriously. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, people are actually reading this stuff and it's driving advertising and so on and so forth. So sometimes in media studies, we have new genres, new media that come along, and it takes a little while for academia to study it and take it seriously. So we're doing that now. And that article kind of brought that to the attention. You have a great chapter. Those of you in the class have a great chapter this week called Digital Gaming and the Media Playground. Read it carefully. There's a lot of good background here. It takes you through the arcade era, the console wars. For me, it's very nostalgic. It brings you into online play, mobile gaming, which is a massive part of this. Let's talk about that scale, because I think it's really important. So it's almost hard to believe. In 2025, I'm looking at my notes here, global gaming revenue was at about $188 billion with a B, dollars. This is a number from a website called Newzoo, which is kind of an industry standard for video games. Morgan Stanley is projecting $275 billion in revenue for this year, 2026, when you factor in both the hardware and the services associated. To give you some context, that number, that $275 billion, that's roughly the size of film, music, and print publishing industries combined. That's wild. Sit with that for a moment. The ESA, which is the Entertainment Software Association, they have a report that comes out every year. In the most recent report, which was 2025, they said 205 million Americans play video games regularly. Regularly. To add context to that, that's 2 out of every 3 people you see walking down the street. Have you seen the story in the news lately? There was a woman, I can't remember where it was, but an older woman, like in her 90s, who went silent. No one had heard from her, anything, and they did a wellness check on her. And so when they were able to enter the home and do the wellness check, they found this 91-year-old woman sitting in her chair playing that bubble game on her phone. She was so enthralled by it that she didn't even let anyone know she wasn't dead, right? So it's kind of crazy. But, I mean, one, that's kind of frightening, right? But it shows you that even those elderly folks, boomers, Gen Xers like me, everyone's playing games. It points to another stat. The average age of a player now is 36 years old. We typically associate video games with kids, but the average age is 36, which I think is fascinating. Broken down by gender, 52% men, 47% women. So I think the major takeaway here is when you hear someone says oh, hey, this is just for teenage boys, right? Video games are just for teenage boys. They haven't been paying attention for what's going on in the last 20 years. So with these stats, it might sound like everything is hunky-dory in video games. There's a massive audience, massive money, there's growth every year, but that is not exactly the case. Two of the most respected game developers in the industry, in the history of this industry, stated that they believe the video game industry is in worse shape than it was during its famous crash in 1983. And we're going to talk more about that crash of 1983 and get into what is going awry here in the video game industry. Before we do that, let's take a quick break. We'll come back for segment 2. You're listening to Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermack. We'll be right back.
Stay connected to your campus. The Questonian has been Cuesta College's trusted news source since 1966. From breaking news to campus life, we cover the stories that matter to you. Follow us at The Questonian on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, or visit questonian.com.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Dr. Shermack here. We're in week 12. We're talking video games. And I've just given you a bunch of spectacular numbers, but I want to get into why so many people in the industry are genuinely scared right now. I think it's really important. This past March, a website called gamesindustry.biz. It's a good resource for news on video games. They ran an interview with John and Brenda Romero, and those names may not ring a bell for you, but all I need to tell you is John Romero co-created the game Doom, which I remember really well from when I was younger. If you don't know Doom, Google it, ask your parents. Brenda Romero is also a legendary game designer in her own right. She's been building video games for 40 years, and they've been in this industry for a very long time. They were in the industry during the 1983 crash. And Brenda Romero in this interview with Games Industry, and I'm gonna quote her directly because this one really kind of stopped me cold. She said, quote, "I feel like the industry's in a really horrible place. I mean, we were there in the 80s for the crash, and this is definitely crashier." I like when people invent words. I do that a lot. Crashier. This is crashier than 1983. And if someone who is as well connected, tuned into this industry and was actually there in 1983 to experience this is telling you that it's crashier today, you should probably take note of it. They were saying that their own studio, Romero Games, went from 110 employees to 9. This was after Microsoft pulled funding from one of their projects. So let's go back a little bit in history and talk about that 1983 crash, because I want you to understand why that comparison is a big deal. Excuse me. In the early 1980s, Atari was the biggest name in video games. I mean, they were the first on the board, not technically, but the first major market, highly successful. They dominated the industry, and suddenly the industry got flooded. There were too many consoles, there were too many games, and most of them were really bad. The most infamous example, I love this story, is the E.T. extraterrestrial video game based on the Spielberg movie. Atari rushed it out in 5 weeks to try to capitalize on the publicity of the movie. Check this out. This video game was so bad that the company literally buried millions of copies of unsold copies in a landfill in New Mexico. There's an entire documentary about it, and it's pretty funny. You should check it out. Between 1983 and 1985, okay, video game revenue in North America dropped 97%. 97%. That's almost an industry killer. The only thing that brought it back was Nintendo. In 1985, they show up with the NES. They show up with our favorite little plumber, Super Mario, and they basically reboot the entire industry. So, but think about that, 97% video game revenue drop. And Brenda Romero is saying this crash today is worse. So let's talk about that crash. What does that mean? Since 2022, about 45,000 people in the video game industry have lost their jobs. 45,000. And this is, this is a wild number. This is a huge number because it's not a major industry as far as people. In 2024, that number alone was 14,600. Devastating blows for the industry. And unfortunately, this is not slowing down. Last month in March this year, Epic Games, this is the company that built Fortnite, they laid off more than 1,000 employees. That was 23% of the company. A quarter of the company gone. There's a piece that was run in Bloomberg. Jason Schreier, I'll add this to our links as well. He argued that companies have spent the last decade chasing what they call a live service model, which Fortnite basically invented. And they wasted billions of dollars in the process. And even the company that invented that playbook, that live service model, can't make it work. And it's kind of wild because Fortnite by no means is a flop. It's one of the most successful video games ever made. And the company, Epic, that made it still had to cut a quarter of its workforce. John Romero, in that same games industry piece, he pointed to Battlefield 6, which is another one of the best-selling games in history. He said in that case, too, people were still laid off. And he said, and I'm quoting him here, he said, quote, "I don't understand what that's all about." We've seen this sort of cuts, these consolidations in other areas where we've talked about. And it's important to listen to veterans in every industry when they compare it to other moments in history. What's wild is that all while these workers are being laid off, the companies at the top of the food chain in this industry keep getting bigger. October 2023, Microsoft closed its acquisition of Activision Blizzard, a $69 billion deal. It's the biggest deal in Microsoft's corporate history, and you know that's a pretty darn big company. This pattern should probably sound familiar. It's the consolidation story we've been talking about all semester in every media industry we've studied. You have a handful of giant companies that swallow up everything underneath them, and there's dramatic ramifications for that. One new and I think hopeful part of this story is that video game workers are organizing. There are unions forming. This is the first time this has been done in the industry at a significant scale. So you have over 2,000 workers at Microsoft-owned studios that have unionized with the group called Communications Workers of America, CWA. That group also represents workers in other media industries, so there's some backbone and establishment there. There was a game developers conference in 2025 where a new union was formed, United Video Game Workers, UVW. And this is just a direct join model where even laid off members can still join. Freelancers can join. I think that's a positive step. It's a labor story that's happening right now, still developing. And unfortunately, it's not going to get the kind of coverage that other labor stories might get. So if you're interested in following this, you may have to pay attention to some more niche sites on it, but they're very good sites. And again, we'll link to those for those of you in the class in the Going Deep segment. When we come back for segment 3, I want to talk about what is being pitched as the solution here. All right. And if you've been paying attention in the class, and you can probably guess maybe what executives are saying is the solution here. Similar pattern, and it's important to identify these patterns. You're listening to Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermack. We'll be back for segment 3 in just a moment.
Want real journalism experience? Join the Questonian. Build your portfolio, develop professional skills, and tell the stories that matter to our campus. Enroll in JOUR 202 or 203 for 4 credits. Questions? Email thequestonian@questa.edu. The Questonian. Your story starts here.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Final segment here. Dr. Shermack here. We're talking video games, and of course, I cannot end this episode, probably any episode, without talking about AI, artificial intelligence, because of course it is having an impact. Just a couple of days ago, one thing I ran across in my prep for today's show, there was a story in Reuters, and I'll link to this on Going Deep for those of you in class. Research note from Morgan Stanley. I have it here in front of me. The Wall Street Investment Bank, right? Many of you are familiar with this. I mentioned them earlier in the episode. They put out a report that had said advanced AI tools could cut video game development costs by nearly half. And they said in dollars, this would unlock about $22 billion in annual profits for game makers all around the world. It's a simple pitch if you think about it. People are going to use AI to generate game environments. They're going to use AI to generate dialogue, to test software. This will lead to smaller teams, faster production times, and then bigger margins. You probably can already see where this is going, right? The Game Developers Conference, this is the biggest event in gaming. They run an annual survey called the State of the Industry. And these things are always great. A lot of industries in media, a lot of industries in general, but media industries run State of the Industry report surveys. If you're ever researching something on a particular medium, Google that, State of the Industry television, State of the Industry radio. You'll often find this. This is the video game version. About 3,000 developers as part of this survey. In 2024, and I'm reading from my notes here, 21% of developers said generative AI would have a positive impact on the industry. Okay? 21% said positive impact from AI. In 2025, same survey, that number dropped to 13%. There is not a good feeling out there about AI. A separate survey from a firm called Quantic Foundry. They surveyed gamers, not developers, right? Because you got to have the gamers involved here. And they asked them about AI in video games. 85% of gamers had a negative attitude towards generative AI in games. So think about this for a moment, what I just told you. You have analysts at Morgan Stanley who are telling executives that AI is the answer. Meanwhile, you have the actual workers who make the games telling you that it's going to ruin the product. And you have the people who play the games telling everybody they don't want AI. This reminds me so much of what's happening with AI in academia, where you have administrators saying, oh, AI, it's great, and students love it, and we need to get them on board. And then I talk to my students about AI, and it's just pure ick. They hate it. There's a huge disconnect here, and we're seeing that in video games. But the executives are pushing ahead anyway. Why? I already gave you this answer. $22 billion in annual profits. They don't care what you think about AI, developers, players. It's going to make them money. Notice I said make them money because this is not savings. This is unlocking $22 billion in profits. Games are still being sold. They just need fewer people to create them. That's profit. If we step back a bit from the gaming part of this and just think about this as an industry, you have a massive profitable industry. You have consolidation happening at the top. Even successful companies are going through massive layoffs. On kind of the brighter side, you have workers organizing for the first time. There's a new technology that's being pushed, AI, by management and resisted by the workers. And there's 40-year veterans in this situation who are sounding the alarm, saying that it's worse than the worst of crashes they've ever seen. This is where this goes beyond just a gaming story. This is a mass communication story, all right? It's the same story we've talked about with newspapers. It's the same story we've talked about with film, with recorded music. Consolidation, labor conflicts, tech disruptions, cultural anxiety. It's the same pattern, just different mediums. Something to think about. If you're looking for a career in communications or journalism, and this is going to sound kind of silly given that I've just told you it's kind of in dire straits, don't sleep on gaming, all right? Even though there are cuts on development side, there's actually a lot of hiring being done in places you might not expect. Gaming journalism is a thing. And they're really doing some of the best accountability reporting out there right now. Stories not only about everything we just talked about, but also on, gender issues, sexual abuse, verbal sexual abuse in the industry that's happening that needs to be called out. There's a lot of really interesting reporting happening, so don't sleep on that. In my research for this over the years and just a couple days ago getting ready for this episode, I mentioned gamesindustry.biz, Kotaku, and even Bloomberg. And those sources did a really nice job. There are reporters at major news outlets who are working the video game, or I should say the gaming beat. Something to think about. And the other thing is also in these industries, you have marketing, you have management of these communities, public relations, content creation, there's narrative design, user research. Communications, journalism majors are needed in these areas. So think about it. It's something to consider. And again, I know there's going through kind of a crash right now. Hopefully the ship is righted. But it still is a massive industry with so much money and interest and audience that there are jobs, even if they aren't jobs necessarily at the companies creating the games right now, there is sort of a lot of jobs on the periphery that are possible. So let's bring this all together and wrap it up as we finalize our Week 12 episode. We started today talking about why video games deserve a place in this class, right? And I hope that you see by now that answer is pretty obvious. This medium reaches more Americans than movies or music. And now we're seeing that it's being shaped by the same consolidation, the same kind of pressures as every other media industry. It falls right in that way. And the crisis right now has huge implications for the people who make games and the people who play them and the people who write about them, quite honestly. The Romeros, who I've referenced throughout this episode, I don't think they're wrong to be scared. And the gamers and the workers who are skeptical of AI, I don't think they're wrong either. Your job, your takeaway, as I've said all along throughout this class, and for really anyone who's listening, is to stay media literate, stay in the loop, pay attention. For those of you in the class, let's talk about what you're doing this week. I mentioned the Chapter 3 reading. Digital gaming and the media playground, a lot of good background, a lot of good history. Discussion board again, post by Thursday, replies by Sunday as usual. The Ask Me Anything board is always available if you have questions. And also don't forget the quiz. Check out the Going Deep reading list. All right, that has some of the sources here. You can go a little bit deeper, as it's called, if you want to read more. It's been a pleasure talking about this topic. Thank you so much for listening. That's our episode here in week 12. A reminder, take care of yourself and those around you. This has been Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermack. So long, everybody.